What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben, and welcome back to another episode of Ben Builds. We are here with the FJ-2 Fury. This is episode number 3, and today we're going to be moving on with the cockpit. I want to get everything painted so that next episode we can weather and then get everything installed together. So first of all, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the paint. Now, I had mentioned last episode that I was a little bit concerned about the paint they called out for. They call out for H336. Now, I went out and I picked up H336, and this is it right here. As you can see, this does not look like any internal colors that would be on an FJ-2 Fury, or really any aircraft from that era. So what I've decided to do is I need to go ahead and improvise. Most of the videos I've seen there that show colorized FJ-2 photos, or have any sort of color there for the cockpit, show almost like a minty olive green, mixed with a little bit of tan, and we've had to go ahead and make our own paint. So I took that, and I took a little bit of olive green. So hemp and olive green came up with this. Now, this isn't exactly right. It's not really olive, but it's also not really tan. It's not really hemp. It's not really anything. It's a nice mixture of the both of those, and I think it's actually pretty close to the pictures I've seen online. We've had to use Mr. Color Thinner, which I'm actually running out of, but I got to tell you, this paint is actually really nice. So I'm going to enjoy going ahead and painting over all the parts and pieces today, and then we're going to go from there. But of course, before we start laying any paint down, we need to go ahead and clean up some of the parts for the inside of the fuselage, some ejector pin marks and whatnot. So let's go ahead and cue up that time lapse, pull out our jeweler files, our sandpaper, and let's clean up all the interiors, and then let's go ahead and paint. So while that paint dries off camera, we're going to go ahead and move over to some of the sub-assemblies. Now, I wanted to mention something that I did notice here on the front landing gear. Now, I was cleaning off the landing gear because there are some ejection pin marks and some seams and whatnot. I've been cleaning that up, and I noticed that it looks kind of squat, kind of short. Now, I went ahead and compared this to one of our reference photos, and I noticed that, yeah, there's not a lot of space here. There's not any of this like piston here showing on the landing gear. It looks like it's completely non-existent. So what I want to go ahead and do is I want to cut the landing gear and install a little bit more plastic. And I think that can be fairly easy. Now, first off, we have to figure out how much we're going to extend the landing gear by, and I'm assuming it's going to be maybe 3 millimeters. I don't think I want to go much more than that. I think 3 will be nice right there in the sweet spot. It'll give it a bit more of a nose-up look, and plus it'll be a little bit more accurate. Now, I've actually done this one other time, and it was long ago before I had my YouTube channel, and I was building a Hobby Boss FJ-4B, and that model actually had the same issue that we have here, where the front nose strut was so squished, it just didn't look right. And most of the Furies have a little bit of like a nose up stance, and I wanted to reproduce that. So I'm doing the exact same thing here that I did then, and that is cut the landing gear and then sand it down, drill out both sides of the pieces, and create my own strut. So that's what we're going to do today. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my jeweler files. We're going to clean off both the top and the bottom of these two parts now, and then we'll be able to stretch some sprue and then get everything drilled in and glued together. Now I guess one could also use something along the lines of brass rod or something like that. I don't have any of that, so I'm going to go ahead and have to resort to stretched sprue. That's not that bad though, because I'm going to be using some Tamiya extra thin, and because of that capillary effect, it should really bond all these plastic pieces together, because that's pretty good stuff, I have to admit. Now to drill out both the top and the bottom of these two parts, I'm going to use my X-Acto knife. We're going to make a little dimple right there in the center of the piece. That's going to act almost like a pilot hole. And then we're going to go ahead and drill out the rest of it with our drill bit, and that should be good enough. We're going to be using a micro drill bit chucked into the end of my pin vise, and I'm going to be real careful with this. I don't want to drill too far off to one side. I want to make sure I'm right in the middle of that part. And I think I've got that pilot hole in the right point, so let's go ahead and just drill it out and see how we do. Now this is a brand new micro drill bit, so it is super sharp. Same thing with the other side. We're going to take my X-Acto knife. We're going to find the exact center of that. We're going to make a little bit of a dimple there, and then we're just going to round out that area. That's going to act as my starting point for the drill bit. Then we'll get that drill bit, put it right there where it needs to be, give it a couple of turns, and since this is so sharp and this is such a new drill bit, it eats a lot of plastic pretty quick. That's why I'm not using any sort of battery-powered rotary tool, because it would eat this plastic up so quickly. Now for that actual strut itself, we're going to be using, like I said, some stretched sprue. And I've got my candle, and I've got my sprue here. We're just going to go ahead and stretch a little bit out of this. I don't want to make it too thin. I want it to be a bit chunkier, kind of beefy looking, because, well, that will match nicely with that beefiness of the landing gear. So right about there should do just fine. Let that cool, and then let's go ahead and test fit it. Now by test fitting it though, we're going to be able to tell if we need to go thicker or thinner or whatnot, and I think this actually looks pretty decent. Now we're going to have to go ahead and line it up and make sure that it fits nicely with that hole that I drilled out. It honestly does. I'm pretty pleased about that. And I think we can go ahead and drop some glue on that and glue it all together. Before I do that though, let's go ahead and cut the other end off and see how our length is and make sure that it fits in with the bottom part of our landing gear. I want to also take my jeweler file, kind of round out the area just a little bit to make sure there's no plastic hanging out that's going to deform or kind of shift it left or right. I want it right in the middle of this opening. And let's test fit it. Yeah, look at that. Okay, that's about what I'm going for, to be honest. It's a little bit of a loose fit, but that's okay. Once I get that glue in there, it'll all kind of cinch it together, and we should be okay. Now for the glue, like I said, I'm going to be using Tamiya extra thin cement. I love this stuff. It's super awesome. That capillary effect will pull it right down in between the two parts, and it'll bond and glue all these plastic parts together. And I think it should be pretty stable. Also, we have to remember we're going to be putting some weight in that front nose to make sure that this isn't a tail dragger. So I want to make sure this is strong enough that it will support a little extra weight by the time I get to that point. But of course, it's not just the landing gear. We also have a scissor link that goes on that. So let's go ahead and let this dry just a little bit, and we'll turn our attention over to that scissor link there on the side of the landing gear, and let's see how that fits. So we have both the top and the bottom of this linkage already installed here, and I'm going to go ahead and glue the center pieces together. And as you can see, I actually could have gone a little bit taller for that landing gear. You could actually stretch this even further if you wanted to. I don't want to. I don't want it to look too stretched out. I think this is actually a really good length. So yeah, that fits perfectly. Let's go ahead and put it off to the side and let it dry. Now, while that part dries, let's go ahead and move over to the cockpit tub where we'll actually do a little bit of detail painting. Now, the color we're going to be using here is a flat black by Tamiya, and I'm going to get a very tiny brush, and we're just going to go ahead and hand brush all of these little instrument panels. Luckily, though, I do have this lovely guide that shows me, yes, in black and white, but it does show me what panels would be a different color. So we'll use that as inspiration and as a direction. Let's go ahead and get that paint out, get this thing all nicely detailed. All right, everybody, we are back on the front console. I did take a little bit of time to kind of shade down everything as well, so I think it looks really cool. I like the subtle fade between the lightened paint and the actual base coat. I think it looks all right, and I've done all the little detail switches and dials that I can with red, white, and yellow. Here we're moving on, of course, to our instrument panel, and we have a little bit of an issue with this. I'll try to explain it as best as I can. So the instrument panel that they have printed here in plastic is actually very nice. Lots of dials, lots of switches, a really good amount of detail. It doesn't really line up and match with the decal they tell you to install. So instead of using that decal and just kind of having it be a little bit weird looking, we're going to go ahead and hand punch each of the dials out using a 1mm punch that I have, and we're going to place them by hand into the actual recesses here on the instrument panel. Talk about tedious, right? But I think it'll look a lot better than just slapping that decal on. Of course, if we use the decal as is, we'd probably have to remove a lot of this detail because there's a lot of large, very prominent switches and dials and gauges. And I think to use that decal, it would be a real pain to get everything to line up. I want it to be kind of interesting looking and have something there to show for it. And I think this is actually a really good way to go ahead and get that done. I think it's going to be a lot better than just sanding off all that detail and slapping down a decal. And now we have something that looks a little bit like this. And I'm not exactly sure how accurate it is, but I like it. I think it looks fine. And I got an excuse to use my 1mm punch. I don't use those very often. It actually worked really well. Now for the rest of the cockpit, I like how that's turned out. We have our switches, red, yellow, white switches. We have everything overcoated here with our basic black and our green with a little bit of sky there to lighten up that green here and there for some fading. So now we're just going to hop off camera real quick. We're going to overcoat everything with a coat of future in preparation for weathering on the next episode. And then we'll be back and we'll see how we turn out. And we are back with a glossed cockpit. Everything is glossed here. We have that future over all of the internals, over the sidewalls of the cockpit tub itself, the instrument panel. We even have it on the ejection seat. All that's been nicely glossed as well. And I think, honestly, guys, we are ready to go ahead and call it quits. Once all of this gloss coat is dry, we will then come back and we can start weathering, meaning we use some panel line washes, we'll use some oils, we'll use whatever we have, and we'll just get this looking as good as we can make it. And also, let's not forget that landing gear that I went ahead and lengthened a bit today. I have to say, after it's dried for about an hour or so, it is firm. Very firm. So I think we are in good position for next episode. Thank you so much for watching. You know the drill. Go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool. And we'll see you back here on the next episode of the FJ-2 Fury by Kitty Hawk. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you soon.